Hi, this is Mike of Black Cat Amplification, and on the bench today I've got a Fender Vibrolux. This is a clone of a Fender Vibrolux Tweed version. It's the 5F11 circuit, and I've built it custom to fit into this really cool Musicairre radio cabinet. Now I believe Musicairre, I think, was made in the Chicago area back in, this particular model was back in the 1930s to 1940s was when this was made. I don't know the exact year of the cabinet, but I can assume that it's probably early 40s-ish. But I had this, I found this really cool cabinet. It was a perfect size for this amp with the amount of tubes it has in it and the controls and everything. And I've got it illuminated with some LEDs, the original front of this radio, so I kept the dial, which is obviously non-functional because it's not a radio anymore. But I've also got a cool Ted Weber speaker in here, which sounds amazing with this circuit. It's a 10-watt combo amp, and it has some really nice features, so let's walk through it. So the audio sample that you heard in the beginning of this video, I basically just mic'd up the speaker on the front of this amp here and played a couple rhythm tracks and a solo track and just recorded it raw. There's no editing done. I didn't even really have planned out what I wanted to play, so there's probably some mistakes in there, but just a little jam so you can hear how well this thing records even with the smaller 6-inch internal speaker. So in the front of this amp, you'll see there's 3 inputs. Now the original Vibrolux had 3 inputs, and in order to get these to be mounted directly on the front of the amp or the radio here, I had to make a plate with a wiring harness, and it worked out really good. And the reason for the 3 inputs is that the original Fender model had 3 inputs, and each of these 3 are attenuated a little bit differently. So the hottest of the inputs is right here closest to the controls. Hottest meaning it's the loudest signal from the guitar or instrument that goes into it, and it's going to be the loudest. If you go down to the middle one, it's going to be attenuated a little bit, and I'd say, like, to my ears, it's probably about maybe a 20% cut in volume and depth maybe, and then this is the lowest attenuated one. So it kind of goes from hottest to down to lowest, and that's exactly how it was on the Vibrolux. It had 3 inputs. There's 4 controls to the amp. The on-off switch is actually wired to the volume knob, so you'll notice how the LED lights come on when you pull the volume knob out. So that's your main volume. And this is your tone knob here, the second knob. So this will give you a wide range of tones. And this circuit, again, this is cloned exactly the way Fender built it. So you're basically getting the exact type Tweed sound that Fender had, minus a different style speaker and a different cabinet, which has a little bit of impact on the sound, but your circuit here is exactly the same, with a couple upgrades, which I'll mention in a minute. So there's also the tremolo section, right? So you have a speed and intensity dial, and the tremolo operates with a foot switch or without. So there's a single button foot switch to turn the tremolo on, right? So you could turn it on and off with a foot switch while you're playing. Or if you want to unplug the foot switch, you can just turn this all the way down, the intensity all the way down, to keep the tremolo off, right? When you want it to come on, if you don't have the foot switch plugged in, you just start turning up the intensity and the tremolo will kick in. And then you control your speed with this knob here. And that's pretty much the front of the amp. Again, it's illuminated with some really cool LEDs. I built a little LED circuit to illuminate it. And this is the original speaker grill cloth with the original mounting screws. And this cabinet I totally refinished, kept it all original, really just basically cleaned it as good as possible, and kind of went over it with a fine-tooth comb to get all the dirt and grime and dust off of this thing. This did not have a radio inside of it. I don't like to gut these to make amps if there's a good working radio inside, but this one I had purchased just the cabinet, and luckily the face here, the dial, was still intact, so I was able to clean that up as well and restore that. So it's a really nice restored radio cabinet. I've got rubber feet on the bottom to keep it from rattling, and also to keep the bottom from getting scraped up, but it's just beautiful. I mean, and I added this really nice ox blood color handle to match the ox blood colored radio style radio style knobs. So let's look at the back of this thing. All right, I decided on this build that I was going to originally build a back, but after I started playing it and then I covered up the back, it actually just sounded so much better, crisper, clearer, and fuller without a back on it. So I decided not to build a back just because it just sounds so good letting it be an open back just like the original Fender cabinets had. So I didn't want to enclose it completely, or you'd be losing some of the sound that is coming from the back of the amp. The chassis was hand built. I completely hand built this and drilled this to fit this style cabinet. You can see that this was a battery operated radio. Part of the label here for the radio and the model number is actually still intact. The entire thing, I guess over time and the years, wore away, but it's kind of cool, so I left that in there like that. Mounted a nice Ted Weber Signature Series speaker. It's a 4-ohm speaker. It's a 6-inch speaker, and it just sounds brilliant with these amps. And this is a 10-watt amp, and this speaker can handle it. And it gets quite loud. If you hook this thing up to a bigger cabinet with more speakers, you're going to get tons and tons of volume. I mean, definitely gigable type volume, you know, in a like a small club. So let's take a look at this. We've got the 3 main large tubes. The first one is a 5Y3 rectifier, and the 2 6V6s. So this is a push-pull amplifier, and the 6V6s are a matched pair. These are exactly matched, and they're biased up perfectly for this amp, and they're all brand new tubes, and JJ makes some pretty good sounding tubes for these Fender circuits. These are the preamp tubes, so you'll notice there is a 12AX7 in the first position and then second as well, and these are also JJ tubes, and they sound really good. So there's tube shields on here to help with cutting out any noise and protection of the tubes and keeping them pushed down. So there's also the output transformer and the main transformer here, and you'll see that the radio dial face here, you'll see the wires that are going up there for the LED circuits to illuminate it. So that's that piece. I've also, which I do in all of my amp builds, included an extra fuse just in case. I always like to tack in an extra fuse just if you're recording or playing and you need one right away. Always a good practice I like to do. And you'll see this little harness here, this wiring harness. So if I were to take the chassis out, you'd see the 3 inputs where your instrument goes. And what I decided to do is, instead of having you plug the instruments into the back of this thing, you can plug them into the front, but with the way the radio is and the thickness of it, I had to mount those separately on a separate metal plate that I built. So I built this really cool wiring harness so that if you have to take the chassis out to do work on the amp, you just unplug the little wiring harness and your inputs will come right off. So a cool little solution to allow you to be able to plug your instruments straight into the front of the radio, because obviously it's a thicker wood and it wouldn't, you know, I'd have to cut a hole into the face of the radio for you to plug it in if the inputs were actually screwed directly to the metal here. So I made a separate plate. The wiring harness connects all your inputs there. So it's a pretty neat little design. You've also got a 2-amp fuse holder here, and this is a really nice grounded cord. It's very strong. It's roughly about 8 feet in length, and it's currently wired obviously for US wall voltages. It's not for European. Also for the outputs, this is an upgrade from the original. Okay, so the original Fenders only had, I believe, a 4-ohm out, or maybe it was just a single 8-ohm. But I've actually decided to upgrade the transformer so that it will allow you to have a 4-ohm, 8-ohm, or 16-ohm impedance load. So you would just switch this to match your speaker. Now, the internal speaker is a 4-ohm, and you always want to plug in, if you're just running one speaker, you want to plug into the main. There's also an external jack, so I've wired this with a second jack, which would allow you to run the internal speaker and a separate cab, or you could run 2 separate cabs and just disconnect the internal speaker. Now I've got this wire wrapped around the transformer here just so it doesn't dangle and touch against the tubes to get hot. But it's got a little bit of extra cord there, and you can run 2 cabinets. So if you were running, say, 2 16-ohm cabinets, you'd want to put it on 8 ohms. If you were running 2 8-ohm cabinets or speakers, you want to put it on 4 ohms, and match your impedance accordingly. So there's charts online that will kind of show you how to do that. But you never want to turn an amp on, a tube amp especially, without a speaker being plugged into it and at least the proper impedance selected, because that could ruin an output transformer. It's always looking for a particular ohm load when you turn this thing on and the tubes start drawing current. So always make sure something's plugged in, and there is an internal speaker, so as long as this is here, you're good to go. And the foot pedal here, this is your plug for the foot switch. Now you don't need to actually plug this in. You can still run the tremolo from the front as long as you turn up that intensity dial, and the tremolo will come on. If you want to run the foot switch, just plug it in, and you can turn that intensity up and switch it off or switch it on, and it will just come on automatically, right? So that's pretty much the back of the amp. So one other thing I wanted to mention is that there is an adjustable bias circuit that I built for this. So the bias for your tubes can actually be adjusted, whereas on the original Vibrolux of the day, they did not have an adjustable bias circuit. So these are matched tubes, which is great for the amp and great for the tubes to have an equal amount of current draw between them, but also they can be biased easily with a pot that is inside of the chassis. So it's kind of a nice feature. That way, if you get a new set of tubes, you always want to rebias the amp if you're just changing power tubes. You could definitely swap the 12AX7s out with different brands, and there would be no issues there, no biasing needed. But there is an adjustable bias circuit, which will really make it nice because you can set the level of how hot you want the tubes to run using the bias if you're a tech and you know what you're doing. Obviously, amps are lethal. It can hold lethal voltages even after it's unplugged, because the capacitors inside of most guitar amps can store a charge that could last months, weeks or months, and you could get shocked with a couple 100 volts, which could kill you. So don't ever take this chassis out unless you know exactly what you're doing and working with high voltage. But I just wanted to mention that is part of the circuit, that this can be biased very easily by turning a pot inside while you're looking at each of the values of, say, a new set of tubes that you may want to replace in the future. All right, what you've all been waiting for, how does it sound? Well, you heard a recording in the beginning of this video. If you started it from the beginning, that's going to give you kind of a really nice idea of what the cleans sound like in this amp. But right now I've got the amp turned on. It's very low volume. I am plugged into the highest input here, so that, you know, means the loudest essentially. Here's your tone knob, so we can... So it's got a really nice, you know, bassy sound. As we turn it up, obviously we're going to get more treble. And it gets really trebly. So it's very bright, and really that's got that Fender chime to it, so it sounds a lot like a lot of the other Fender circuits out there. But this one's really neat because the vibrato on this, I mean, obviously they're calling it a Vibrolux, right? The vibrato on this is just amazing. I love it. So let's try that out. So I've got the intensity up just a little bit. Give it a little more intensity. And then I'm going to turn down the speed so it can get pretty slow. And get very fast. Kind of like it right there, sweet spot. sounding vibrato. And now, a lot of people are probably going to wonder, can this thing really crank it out? And yes, it can crank out some volume. So let's talk about gain with this amp. A lot of these old Fender amps weren't really built to have massive amounts of gain. They're not high gain amps. They're really well known for their clean sounds. But what I really like about a lot of these older models is if you push them, they'll give you some dirt. So this one is just like the others in that respect. If you've got this plugged into the highest volume input and you're running a set of pickups, which actually, you know, like hotter pickups, they don't have to be active pickups, you're going to get some really nice gain out of this thing if you dime it. But you don't even have to dime it. It really starts to break up, depending on your pickups and your guitar, probably like around 6 or 7. So you get a lot of nice clean headroom, which it takes pedals great. So that's like on 4 or 5 right now, and I've got one pedal turned on right now, which is a reverb pedal, just to add a tiny bit of little room sound. Hear that? Just a little bit of echo. So really, really nice, crisp sound, and it just fills the room. I mean, I'm in a small office bedroom right now, and it's really got a lot of volume. So let's give it a little more heat here, okay? This thing could definitely crank it out. Now I'm going to show you with a different guitar that's got a little bit hotter pickups, and you'll see how much more gain we get. Alright, I've got my trusty Charvel, which I've had since about 1991-ish. This was brand new back when I got it, and it's been an awesome guitar. I have upgraded the bridge pickup here, and this is a Seymour Duncan Invader pickup, which is a passive pickup, but yet it has quite a lot of, it puts a lot of signal into amps, right? It's a lot louder than some pickups. So if I put on here the original Jackson neck pickup, don't change any volumes, and I put this Invader on, so you can see how much hotter that pickup is, right? Now I've got the volume on like 2, and my neighbors are probably going to start complaining, because it's pretty loud. But listen how hot this starts to get, even at low volumes. Turn it up to about, say, 3 or 4. So it's already starting to get pretty hot. So if I put it about halfway, man, it just sounds so crisp. I'm going to go a little bit hotter before my neighbors yell at me, but not even all the way up. Even all the way up, and you can hear how much gain it's got. It really sounds awesome. And if you plug this thing into a speaker cabinet, a much bigger speaker cabinet with bigger speakers, you're going to be able to push a lot more air, which is going to give you a lot more volume, and the gain just sounds so amazingly warm with bigger speakers. This is, again, a 6-inch speaker, and it sounds incredible for this room. But if I wanted to play a club with this thing, and I plugged it into a 4x12 cabinet, for example, it sounds great. Let's do that. Okay, now she's plugged into not one, but 2, a Marshall 4x12 cabinet and a Mesa Boogie 4x12 cabinet. I've got the grill off of the front of this because I was doing some recording and I wanted to get the microphones really close to the speaker, but 2 cabinets. It's running a full stack now at 10 watts. Can't really crank it up right now because it's late and my neighbors would be pretty pissed. However, let's see what this sounds like with the cleans like we were doing before. Again, this is on like maybe 2 or 3. Main difference I hear in this room is going to be the bass levels and a little bit of the mids. I can definitely hear with bigger speakers they're able to push that bass response out, and it just sounds so full, almost like a bass guitar is playing these bass notes. Let's turn some tremolo on. Just beautiful. It sounds so good. I'd love to crank this up right now and show you what it sounds like through a full stack. But again, if you're not actually in this room, you're probably not going to really hear a whole lot over the phone. So you kind of got the idea of what it sounded like through this speaker. So what I'm going to do is put on a pedal right now, which is a tube screamer, an Ibanez tube screamer. So that'll be like playing in front of the amp with a tube screamer. The volume is still pretty low. So you can hear what this would sound like with some pedals. So let's try one other thing. Let's throw a fuzz pedal on this. And this is a pretty gainy fuzz pedal, okay? So it's gonna blow my neighbors out here. So it takes pedals great. Overall, this thing is amazing. It sounds awesome. 10 watts, tons of power, and it just looks cool as hell. One other thing I like to do with this, when I first built it, is testing some sounds out. I actually plugged in, I used a little 1/4-inch jack, and I plugged in my phone, or an MP3 player, and started streaming some really old radio music through this thing, and it sounded amazing. So if you just turn the tremolo off and play using the volume and this dial, you can use this as like a home stereo. You can play music through it, and it just sounds so good, and it feels like you're listening to an old vintage radio back in the 1940s. So it could be really cool to have in a living room or a man cave or a basement. So shoot me a message if you got any questions. This is going to be on sale. on Reverb and eBay until it's sold. So get it while you can.